Hi, everybody. Greetings from Boise, Idaho. I'm Dennis Reed. I serve as the Diocese of Bethlehem's consulting missioner for Convocations. It's great to be with you all today, even if virtually and pre-recorded. Megan and I certainly miss you all and our time together at St. Francis, but I hope this is a joyful and useful time for you and your ministry this week. I'm excited to talk to you today with an update about our Convocation and Assembly ministry in the Diocese of Bethlehem. For an opening scripture word, we'll hear from the letter to the Hebrews. This is a quote that's been on so much of our material already, so I thought it might be a good start for us and a good theme for our opening presentation here. So let us not neglect to meet together, as is the habit of some, but encourage one another, and all the more as you see the day coming. Again, a great biblical theme for us, something for our mutual benefit together, and something we've been talking about for months now with this idea straight from Hebrews. So from the very beginning, this was a big part of our focus, and that being, what does it mean to be a part and a member of the Diocese of Bethlehem? What does it mean for us to take that cue from Hebrews and desire to meet together? In so many of our conversations, we all began to realize this sort of very appropriate idea that if the smallest unit of the church is in fact the diocese, it made us realize how much more we wanted to spend time as a diocese together. And that's at least in part how we arrived at convocations. There was an eagerness to be together, a curiosity about what God had and has in store for all of us and our congregations, and very much a readiness to try new things in partnership. So from the beginning, these were kind of our goals: to develop a structure that was useful for us, to listen to as many voices as would talk to us and would meet with us and meet together, and then to build relationships and relate to one another in ways that might be surprising and new for us. So first, let's start with development. It was a very Episcopal instinct, I think, to address a solution with a structure. We make committees, we make new things, and we put people on them, and sometimes that is really well-meaning, and sometimes it isn't. For us this time, we especially had intentional conversations about if our desire is to make a new structure and start with a bunch of new committees and that kind of thing, it had to have a purpose. It had to have a purpose for the life and the ministry of the church. So from convocations, with gathering our churches in geographical areas, from that came assemblies, which is that leadership group with representation both with clergy and lay people, as well as empowering lay leaders to sort of help that on the ground. Those are our conveners, who both head up the assembly meetings and will build their role as we move into the future. As well as, to some extent, you also have us as staff on the diocesan staff to work with and have support from in terms of beginning this work, but also helping you in any way that we can. So our structure had to have intent. It had to have purpose. And we think that so far that's working. Part of the guidelines for that structure was making sure that we included everybody. We saw the success that some congregations were already having in partnership, be it in more official capacities with sharing clergy, or just in a couple things in ministry and sharing ministry together. So we kind of thought, if that is working in a few places, let's bring that to everybody. Let's have the opportunity for even the smallest of parishes with the fewest of people to join together so that more ministry and more good things can come from it. Admittedly, this has been a little tricky with some clergy in transition and parishes in transition and search, but for the most part, we have had pretty good representation from just about every congregation at assembly meetings or hearing feedback or taking the survey. So we're pretty happy with that. And again, we wanted this to have a purpose and an intent. So again, taking that cue from Hebrews, sometimes just meeting together for the sake of being together is a step in the right direction, but we also want to expand what we thought was possible regarding fellowship, collaboration, and ministry. So after we had our structure in place, one of the hallmarks of convocations was to listen, and was to have the desire not exactly to impose what we thought as the diocese should offer to congregations and convocations, but rather to sort of see where it goes organically. and see what comes from the beginning idea of where we would start, and to see where people would take it with their own ideas. So that started with our original leadership of conveners. These are our 8 lay leaders, one for each of the 8 convocations. We are still defining this role, but I see it expanding as one that assists me in my work in terms of bringing a lot of this together and building communication, especially on the ground, that I can't really do from here. I mean, phone calls and Zoom and email are great, but they have their limits. So I'm excited to get those 8 conveners into your congregations and to build relationships with people on the ground. I'm excited for them. They're going to be great at that work. Then assembly is the thing that comes next. These were terrific meetings. Again, this is ideally one clergy person and one lay person from each congregation that comes together 3 or 4 times a year to do the business of convocations. And our first meetings from the sort of late summer into fall with each assembly was a relationship building exercise, and also a place to continue this listening and hear the things that were on your hearts and minds, and to consider these really big picture questions of what this could look like as we move together into the future. One thing I sensed over and over again was that these were conversations that probably we need to keep having, but maybe could have been having for the last decade or longer, that there was so much energy here. There were so many opinions, occasional disagreements, but they all came from good places and always with respect. And so even though we came to recognize that sometimes our Sunday mornings look very different, what I know church to be like might be different from what you know church to look like, and sort of the traditions that we carry with us, as well as different hopes and concerns for the future, the more that we know about each other with regard to those kinds of things, what our congregations look like, what we hope we can do together, where we see difficulties ahead, the more we have that conversation, the better the success of this endeavor will be. And so to hear stories and to understand the sort of history of our communities was a really exciting exercise. And in a minute, I'll recap some of the broad themes that happened in just about all 8 of those meetings. So continuing from structure to listening, there is this idea of relating and following up on some of these conversations. So I've had the chance to speak to some of you individually, as well as some of our congregation's wardens, which have been great conversations to sort of hear how things are going with you in your congregation. I hope to make that a continual trend in my work for the diocese. Obviously, you as clergy are vital to this work, both in what you do and what you bring to assembly, but also maybe even more so to sort of keep cheerleading this in your parishes. And so the more I can support you, the better. And that might look different for every single person. I'd love to talk to your congregation in some way, virtually or over Zoom or with your vestry or some committee you might have if they'd like to learn more about what we're trying to accomplish here. If that means that there are digital resources that we can provide, be it things for your website or print or your bulletins or ways that we can sort of communicate what we're trying to do easier to your folks, I would love to do that, however might be most helpful in your setting. So again, trying to build relationships, trying to make connections between congregations that are close to each other, but could also deepen what they already know or have about one another. And we saw that in some of these commonalities. I think it was kind of fun to realize that though we are all coming from different places, there are a lot of things we're either hoping for or worrying about or that are just sort of hallmarks of our time together that we all go through. And these were the big ones. So I want to take a minute here to sort of pause and look at this list, because each of you has been to one assembly meeting, hopefully, and that means that you've seen 1/8 of what our diocese represents. But all of them, just about, had some sort of semblance of these kinds of conversations. So the biggest thing that people talked about over and over again was community and service. For me, that's a great thing to give thanks for, because we have a people who are yearning to give, a people who are yearning to serve, and a people who are yearning to do that together. So that might mean partnering with other churches in the area that aren't just Episcopal churches. It might mean building relationships with community partners that aren't even church related, but maybe can do this work or have been doing it longer than we have. But it's kind of nice that this was a deep theme of our work, was that if we're building community, that looks so many different ways and can include so many different things. So I was glad to see that that was something that continued in every single conversation of the 8 that we had. Also a theme, given some of the sizes of our congregations, were sort of an admission that, okay, we may not always be a big church, but that also means that we have more opportunity to do things together. So I was glad to see that there was sort of a recognition of that, for example, taking the next one, youth and young families. Over and over again, we heard people say, we used to have so many more children. Is there a way that we can offer this kind of ministry about something we clearly care about with formation and Sunday school and youth group and whatever that might look like, but with all maybe 6 or 7 congregations in our convocation? Is that a sort of a healthy way to bring out a new ministry that doesn't have to be every week, but together we might make something really good that on our own we just don't have as a possibility right now? So there was a lot of talk about how do we combine a bunch of smaller communities to sort of have a larger group identity that can provide more in terms of formation, fellowship, worship, even, who knows? Sky's the limit. Then there were these 2 competing thoughts. There was a very healthy idea of, we really just want to get back to normal. We want to get back to a time when we had more people in our congregations. We want to get back to a time that was pre-COVID and that let us do the kinds of things we wanted to do without worrying about masks and mandates and all of that. I will say there is sort of a temptation there and a comfort there, and maybe even just a little bit of danger. The danger being that we can always be like the Israelites who want to go back to Egypt. We can always look at the sort of grass is greener in a previous time, or sort of this idea of sort of nostalgia being the better time of who we were. So I think maybe I just want us to be cautious there, to say that perhaps that just might not happen, be it people understanding what church means in their lives a little bit differently. And that might mean we need to address those needs in new ways. So getting back to normal, sure, on one hand might be really helpful, and sort of having a healthy part of our community life again is certainly a goal. But there was also just as loud of a sort of a chorus of not going back to normal, of sort of recognizing that this is a new and different time. And maybe that calls the church to be new and different itself. So I think we have a pretty healthy competition there in our congregations and in the voices of our people of either being on one side of the fence there or the other, to say we really want things to go back to the way they were, or no, that's not going to happen. How do we move forward? Something we'll have to navigate as leaders as we move forward in convocation ministry for sure. Certainly figuring out COVID, maybe in a time and a place when it's not still kind of bearing over us and changing the way we do church. But again, also as a learning experience. There's a lot there, and a lot of our conversations sort of tried to address that as sort of the awkward elephant in the room, but also something that we can't avoid. So again, something that will come up in future meetings, I'm sure. This next one was from our friends in the North. This conversation started in Convocation 1, but we also kind of spread it out a little bit. And that being that, okay, being a small church is not necessarily a bad thing. There are great gifts of a smaller community, and there are things that maybe a smaller community can do that are harder to get off the ground in a big community because it's a little less efficient. So I kind of want to keep that conversation going with them to say, okay, what does it mean to be vibrant, sustainable, and active, even if it is a smaller size? Well, maybe there's a time and a place for that we, as the rest of the diocese, will learn from them and others that are that size. So kudos to that conversation. A theme we'll talk more about later in this conversation is racial justice, and sort of, again, the recognition of this is something that is going to be part of the future of this diocese and of our churches, because especially the last 2 years, we and our people are learning that this is not just something we see on the news, but also an imperative of the gospel. And we are yearning for justice and yearning to bring it to those who haven't experienced it. So is there a place for that in convocation ministry? Sure. Might look different in lots of different places, and maybe not every single one will tackle it, but it's certainly here to stay as a topic that will probably continue to come up and something our people are caring about. Another fun thing, don't exactly remember which convocation this came out of, but the idea that part of what it means to come together is the opportunity for a deeper sense of formation and spirituality. And maybe that's kind of this traveling ministry that happens around our congregations, and a conversation we keep having and offering to people in lots of different places. So was happy to hear that. Also, the idea of sharing current events, the things that are happening in our congregations. I think we've always tried to do that on some level, but maybe this will be a nice vehicle to do it a little more officially and efficiently. So we'll see how that goes. And then this came up quite a bit. Simply the idea of going to each other's contexts, seeing each other's congregations and churches. This came out of a conversation in one of the Bethlehem and Allentown area convocations of, I mean, we're 10 minutes from each other, not even sometimes, and we've never been inside your building and we don't really know your people. How can we change that? How can we sort of set up a circuit of traveling events and just seeing one another and seeing what that brings us? So these were the big conversation pieces that we touched on in just about everybody's conversation. So it was kind of nice to see some commonality, but also difference. And again, those are just some of the waters we'll need to navigate together as leaders and as members of our assemblies to see where that leads to ministry and how we might address things that are conflicts in healthy and loving ways. So following the assembly meetings, we asked for participation in a survey to help us better understand our ministries on a congregational level, as well as where our strengths lie for future ministry. There'll be a whole separate conversation and presentation about the data that we received and what we think it might be telling us, and the conversation that we can all have together individually about what does that mean for our next assembly meeting. But we'll hang tight on that and we'll address that in our next presentation. So stay tuned for a conversation about our congregational survey. So next, to look ahead, we turn again to Scripture, and this time to Isaiah, to this great text that foreshadows the end of the exile in Babylon, that Zion will indeed be restored, even when it didn't look like it, that Israel will be indeed redeemed, even though they didn't know what was happening next. And so, at least for me, this makes me remember that God, in so many times and so many places, has done something new, often dragging Israel along for the ride and showing them that, yes, their salvation is near. So from the prophet, behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. This is a good word for the church in 2022, isn't it? It doesn't feel like we've quite returned all the way yet. We're still hoping for people to return to us and to our pews. We're still waiting for our everyday reality to be in a place where COVID isn't ruling much of what we do. But we are a hopeful people, a people who have seen again and again what God has done for the people of God. And we hope and pray that our work together as clergy and fellow ministers with our lay people will indeed be like this text, that we might perceive what new things and possibilities God is inviting us to see and to hear and to do. So we have so much opportunity in front of us. I'm excited for you. I'm excited for your convocations and the meetings you get to have soon and to be together and to learn together and to dream together. These, I think, will inform our next steps. So in those assembly meetings, we asked everyone, what's your dream for the Episcopal Church? And people tended to react to that in two different ways, a small picture answer or a big picture answer. So for some, this was a question to see an opportunity to go back to normal and to be find a comfortable setting, but also at the same time, maybe more positively, to be able to better tell the story of why this particular people and a particular congregation and town love Jesus and what that means and why they might hope to bring more people into that. So that was kind of one angle of looking straight to the congregation. How can we improve? How can we do things that get this word out there better? For others, this was a larger question about possibilities and even a new approach of what could happen next. The key here was something new, a new ministry maybe, a new partnership with our neighbor congregations, new life after COVID, a new vision of what our communities might look like in 5 or 10 or even 20 years, and a new understanding of what it means to be a member of the Diocese of Bethlehem. Of course, there's no one answer. There's no right answer to what our dreams are for the church. And it certainly depends on our perspective and our situations. Though I do hope we consider that God is always doing new things within and with us, providing opportunities to gather, to learn, and to dream. And these are places we believe are a good starting point that might make new things possible in your convocations with God's help. So first, this starts with coming together. You've already started to do this in several ways. Conveners have met together. Each of our assemblies have met. Several of our convocations have had sort of informal meetings over, food or ministry, which is a great start, and we want that to continue. More about that in a bit. Looking ahead, our conveners are going to meet again next week to talk about each other's first assembly experiences, as well as how we can build up their role. To this part, most of the communication and the behind-the-scenes stuff has been from me or from Steve or the bishop and staff. And we want to make sure that we are using the talents and the sort of spiritual gifts of these conveners, especially on the local level. So my hope, again, is that for them to grow active relationships with other congregations in their convocation. And we'll also figure out what the best way for them to continue a lot of our communication will look like. Might be different in every convocation, but that's okay. Assembly will also meet for its second meeting very soon. I expect another good round of informative and good conversation. We're always trying to build relationships here. Remember, that's the key. This time, given what we've learned from our first meeting, as well as recapping the survey data, we're going to look to set events for participation and start connecting the dots for future collaboration. So the goal here, again, continue to build relationships, but also move from the sort of in theory things to the concrete things. Events, moments, partnerships, new ministries, see where that might take us so that individuals who aren't part of assembly or who are our regular parishioners can participate and have this be a new thing for them. And then 2022. By January, our goal is for each convocation to have a working calendar for the year to come so that we have plenty of notice for either newer, bigger events or the sort of regular things like assembly or convener meetings. And obviously that won't be a final calendar, as we hope to continue to add to it as is necessary. So that's what the gathering aspect will look like. What about learning? This is something I'm really excited for, and I hope that you can join us for the first session of this. So we're going to look towards a formation and advocacy event, not only just learning about the idea of racial justice and reconciliation, but also about one another and our places in ministry regarding that really important topic, which is one of our 5 priorities of the Diocese of Bethlehem. For Our Common Life is a new series that was born out of 2 independent needs coming together simultaneously. And that was first an idea that we were really wanting to create something where we could meet in our convocations for formation. And then also the Racial Justice and Reconciliation Task Force wanted to hold an event that was a sort of learning-based and advocacy around certain conversations and topics. So we kind of joined forces and said, why don't we do this together? In this new series, we'll hear from important voices across the church on topics of scripture, tradition, repentance and repair, and the future of the church's mission, all with regard to the conversation of racial justice and reconciliation. Big thanks to Sandy Millien, Chris Sutton, and Judy Dickerson for all the work they've done behind the scenes to get interviews and ask people to participate and sort of plan the idea of what this series would look like. So happy to announce that December 2nd is a Thursday night, 7 p.m. via Zoom. Our first interview on Episcopal and Anglican tradition is with Stephanie Spellers, one of the presiding bishop's canons. We're delighted to have her, and we didn't think we'd get her, but we did. And she offered us an incredible conversation. Also, thanks to David Zwifka for being one of our panelists, interviewers on that conversation. So please come and check out his work as well. This is going to be a great interview that will lead to what we hope are great guided conversations and facilitated conversations in convocation about these topics in our tradition, as well as what that might lead to on our local level, be it something in your convocation or conversations in your congregation about racial justice. But this was a better start than we could have hoped for, and it's going to be a whole series with at least 4 of these interviews on different topics. We hope you'll join us. We hope you'll have great conversation together in your convocation. So that's our first learning opportunity. I'm not sure I understand. What about dreaming? So events like For Our Common Life are just the beginning. We hope that that kind of event will make us discern where else would we like to do this? What other opportunities for formation, advocacy, fellowship, worship, ministry, who knows, can we gather in convocation to have those conversations together? So The more we have those conversations, the more we'll begin to know about one another, our passions for ministry in the church, and who knows what else. Also, this idea of connection events. And again, some of our convocations have started to do this, but there are going to be so many opportunities for each assembly to put on an event where we meet and greet and minister together. It can be purely fellowship. It can also have sort of a community focus with it, maybe a food drive or some sort of feeding ministry or who knows what. But our goal here is to just bring as many people together as possible, to put events on our calendar where we can connect and meet people that we haven't met yet in each other's congregations and see that these commonalities are happening in real time and in real places. And then partnering. This is the idea, I think, that has the most potential in convocations. Sometimes it can be a delicate conversation. I've learned that the idea of partnership can sort of be a trigger word in some congregations about maybe a memory of the past where they had to be yoked with someone and it didn't work the way they wanted. And that's not necessarily the road this has to go down. If congregations would like to try a formal partnership like that, that could bear a lot of fruit and it could be a good move for the future. But that's also not something that we need to insist upon. If that's something that comes organically out of the congregations, great. But partnering can look so many different, can take on so many different identities. It could mean trying to share a staff person across a convocation where instead of one parish paying for it, everyone could chip in to afford sort of a common missioner in your context. It could mean sharing clergy for Sunday mornings or Sunday evenings or Saturday evenings in a way that maybe hasn't happened in your context before. It could also be something as simple as coming together for a new ministry where two churches who are down the street for one another, who have barely talked, do something together. So the sky's the limit here. There's so much opportunity for what partnership could look like. And that's part of our work together, is to sort of dream it up and to see what happens. As a friend of our diocese, Gina Campbell, might say, how can we get 5% more curious about one another's lives, gifts, and congregations? That's where our dreaming for new things comes into play. So, how do we do this? Through all of this, we started in a place of new structure, hearing each other's stories and backgrounds, and building relationships. Soon, we will be gathering again together. We'll have an opportunity to deepen our discipleship and formation and learning, and we'll dream together and see how we might make all of these things a reality. So how do we do this? What do we do next to start accomplishing what we hope to accomplish? These three things. First, it starts with support. We are all in this together. We are all on the same team. And I think on some broader level, we're all hoping for the same outcome here. And that is fruitful ministry, deeper relationships, and who knows what, looking to God's hopeful future for this diocese. I think that starts with support, both with sort of member congregations inside a convocation, but also from diocesan staff. For example, we're not in a place where we are dictating what's happening or that you need our permission to do stuff, but instead, how can we come to you? How can we talk to your people about these new endeavors? How can we support your ministry and what you're doing on the ground? That could look like so many different things. It could look like teaching and again, helping your people understand what we're doing. It can be bouncing ideas off of one another. It can be venting if you need someone to talk to. Bottom line is the diocesan staff is here for you. And if that looks like different things in each place, we're here for you. Next is communication. This is going to look different in the future in terms of what we're doing in convocations. And part of what assembly and conveners are going to be tackling this time around is what is the best way for our convocations to communicate within sort of intercommunication. I think there's an opportunity here to look into new ideas. For example, it wasn't that long ago when even something like email wasn't an effective use of how we communicated with our parishioners. Now we can't imagine doing church without it. Same thing with social media or Facebook or Bethlehem Episcopalians and our virtual worship things and YouTube and who knows what. There could be an opportunity for how we might employ some of these things outside of just normal email or normal social media, but maybe even something like a private Discord for your convocation or the whole diocese, where there's more of a real-time active feel in terms of a chat feature or a video feature or sharing resources immediately and that you can get on multiple devices. It's going to be something that we talk about in terms of what is going to serve our communication best, but we also hope to make it both efficient and useful. We don't want to try something new for the sake of doing something new, but if it will improve what we're doing, this might be a good time to try it. And convocations are kind of a neat sort of think tank to make that happen. Finally, creating. This is where the rubber hits the road. I'm so excited for your next assembly meeting and the one after that and after that, because I think, especially from the survey, which we'll talk about later, there's a desire to get this off the ground and for your people to participate. At least that's what we've seen so far. So that starts, again, with assembly, with conveners, and with you to say, I have a great idea. I want to make it happen. When can we start? So hopefully that's the kind of idea that can go through your convener, through the staff if you need some help and support to pull it off, and then into your congregations. So support both within and from staff, communication in ways that we're going to build, and creating new ministries, new fellowships, new events, things for your folks to participate in. So the potential for our work here is great. As you spend some time in your convocation groups during your retreat and into the future, here are a few questions for your consideration and discernment that might help focus our potential. First, what makes you hopeful for this work in 2022? Next, how do we address concerns with honesty and love in our conversations? And finally, what have we learned thus far about ourselves, about one another, about the church in COVID, and what the church might look like for the future? So at the beginning, we said our goals were to develop, to listen, and to relate. I think we're getting there. I believe that we're on a good path to continue this important work. And I want to thank all of you for all that you've done so far, for joining Zoom meetings and answering emails and phone calls and considering the survey and talking this up in your congregations. I also want to thank you for what you will continue to do as you participate in our next events and be cheerleaders in your congregations for this work and how they can participate. Hope you will mark your calendars for December 2nd as we begin For Our Common Life with Stephanie Spellers. And please, please, please know that I and our whole DioBeth staff are here to offer our support and help in any way that we can. So I look forward to chatting with you in some phone or Zoom question and answer time and hearing what questions and thoughts you might have moving forward. Thanks again. Talk to you soon.